The Incredibles is not a kid's movie. It kind of reminds me of one of those happy-go-lucky songs with a really up-tempo instrumental, but when you take a second listen to the lyrics, they're kind of somber, dark, and maybe even a little nihilistic. The movie is colorful in its imagery and it has a lot of funny bits and gags, but the themes of The Incredibles is unapologetically adult. It comments on the fear of the mundane lifestyle a lot of us eventually lead, the struggles to find that work-life balance, and a lot of other things that really resonate with me differently as I get older. And as a former athlete and current family man, Mr. Incredible's journey hits a little close to home. A little too close to home, if I'm being honest. No matter your age, race, or gender, at some point you're going to have some sort of struggles with identity. And I'm not quite sure what it is about men, but for some reason we seem to have a tough time getting over the past in terms of who we were and the things that we used to do. Maybe it's societal expectations, maybe it's expectations we put on ourselves, or some combination of the two. But let's take a deeper look into The Incredibles and Mr. Incredible's journey to identify some of the traps he falls into.
Every superhero has a secret identity. I don't know a single one who doesn't. Who wants the pressure of being super all the time?
Brad Bird, the creator of the movie, admits that his personal life struggles unintentionally bleed into this film. His struggle to find that work-life balance, and most importantly, his guilt over that, heavily inspired Mr. Incredible's arc. And speaking of arcs, the main character archetypes are all based on roles they typically play in a family and the different societal pressures that they usually face.
What do you mean?
Well, men are expected to be strong, so Bob is super strong.
Right.
Mothers are pulled in 10 different directions at once, so I have her be elastic. Teenagers are defensive and insecure, so I had her be invisible and have force fields. And 10-year-old boys are energy balls who want to open every door and press every button now. And babies are unknowns. They could have no powers or they could have all the powers.
Bob's entire life is based around being Mr. Incredible, and now that he doesn't have that anymore, it's literally like a piece of him is missing. He has a wife, a family with 3 beautiful children, and a suburban home. But none of that really matters to Bob. He never really cared to have a family. Even him and Elastigirl's wedding at the beginning of the movie, you could tell he kinda had the mindset that the party would never end.
Hey, is the night still young?
You're very late.
How do I look? Good?
Oh, the mask. You still got the mask.
You look at Bob throughout this movie, especially when it comes to family, his interactions, he is pretty tapped out. He's very disengaged with his kids, he's extremely disconnected from his wife, and even when Helen goes out of her way to try to make connection and conversation, he just responds like a drone on autopilot.
Dash got sent to the office again.
Good.
No, Bob, that's bad.
What?
He's somber, he's depressed, and most importantly, he's extremely angry because in his eyes, him and his family are living a much smaller life than they have to. His son has super speed and can easily be a star on a football or track team, but he has to stay away from sports because they're keeping a low profile. This is something that clearly frustrates Bob a lot. At this point in his life, his kids aren't really individual people, they're just extensions of him. And if they're extremely normal and regular, then so is he. His worldview, their powers are their purpose, so much so that he inappropriately lights up when he hears Dash gets in trouble for using his powers at school.
They caught you on tape and you still got away with it? Whoa! You must have been booking. How fast do you think you were going?
If I'm being honest, I unfortunately relate to and feel for Bob a lot more than I wish I did. If you'd have told me 15 or hell, even 10 years ago that I would be done playing basketball by the age of 24, I would have laughed in your face. On top of that, there was this weird guilt that I felt into my late 20s because similar to how Bob feels, I feel like if you have a gift, you shouldn't squander it, you should use it. And for years, I was just kind of stuck. I was in this limbo and doing normal things and working regular jobs. Those things just felt empty to me. Even if the job was a really good one, I never felt fulfilled, and being in relationships was no different. When something like that is such an integral part of the identity you create for yourself, it can be extremely hard to move on from it.
Sometimes I think I just like the simple life, relax a little and raise a family.
One of the least talked about and most symbolic characters in this movie is Mirage. Yeah, on some level, she's your classic honeypot type character that you would see in any sort of spy movie, but for Mr. Incredible, she's a lot more than that. She's the literal embodiment of the fun, the intriguing, and overall attractiveness of that better life. She tells him everything he wants to know and everything that he already feels about himself deep down. And if you listen closely, the words she tells him on their first meeting are pretty much directly going against everything Helen's told him.
Reliving the glory days is better than acting like they didn't happen.
Yes, they happened. But this, our family, is what's happening now, Bob.
The supers aren't gone, Mr. Incredible. You're still here. You can still do great things.
From that perspective, Mirage is also subtly and not so subtly used as an allegory for cheating. And when Mirage invites him to the island, his entire demeanor changes. He's all of a sudden more attentive, he's working out again and slimming down. Him and his wife's sex life is clearly implied to be back active again. And much like anyone who takes that step into cheating on their partner, looking for that outside validation in a relationship, it leads them to disaster. In this case, it's a robot monster that's literally being programmed and designed to kill them and other supers.
Mr. Parr no longer works at InsureCare.
What do you mean? He's on a business trip. A company retreat.
My records say his employment was terminated almost 2 months ago.
Easily one of the most intense scenes in the movie is when Helen and the kids are making their way to the island to find Bob. At this point, Helen just believes Bob is cheating on her, and she thinks she's gonna go to this island and find him living his superhero fantasies out with some new woman, and she couldn't be more wrong. Well, at least about the new woman part. When Syndrome gets wind that they're in the area, he sends a couple of missiles up at the plane. Syndrome has no care in the world that she announces that there's kids on the plane. And this scene is super gut-wrenching because when the missiles approach, Elastigirl is pushing Vi to lead a force field over the plane. She just can't do it. She's never been in the field before. There's no jokes, no wisecracks, just pure intensity and raw emotion. Now, as audience members, we know that they survived this plane crash, but up until this point, Mr. Incredible thinks he's lost his entire family.
Why are you here? How can you possibly bring me lower? What more can you take away from me?
Crazy thing is, he's back to his prime weight. He's back to his prime build. He's got a new super suit. He's back to doing all the heroic things and trying to stop evil. All the things that he was missing and he thought that it was a void in his life. But his family, the thing that he looked at as a burden and something that was holding him back for all these years, is now gone. The entire sequence from the plane missiles to the kids having to fend for themselves and Helen eventually getting back to Bob to save him is probably the most real and raw Pixar has ever been. After realizing that his family isn't dead, that's the first time in this movie that Bob seems to acknowledge and appreciate his family. He stops looking at them as a burden, but more as a benefit. But with this sudden realizations comes a whole set of new fears and insecurities.
I'm not strong enough.
Strong enough, and this will make you stronger?
Yes. No.
That's what this is? Some sort of workout?
I can't lose you again.
So even though Bob has been a parent and a husband long enough to have a teenager, this is almost like him becoming a dad and a real husband for the first time. He's been running around chasing the glory days with no consideration for how his actions have consequences for everyone and not just him. It's that sudden realization that every new dad has that any decision they make, whether good or bad, right or wrong, can possibly have some sort of effect on their family. On one end, that can be empowering, and the film portrays that with them coming together to defeat Syndrome rather than letting Bob go out there and do it on his own. But that realization is also a terrifying one because it can have negative impacts as well.
This is my fault. I've been a lousy father. Blind to what I have. So obsessed with being undervalued that I undervalued all of you.
And with that, my interpretation of the first Incredibles movie's messaging would have to be careful with what you allow to become a part of your identity. You're not a car guy. You're just a guy who loves and appreciates cars. I was never a basketball player. I was someone who loved and enjoyed playing the game of basketball. And now I love and enjoy teaching kids how to do the same. You might call yourself a YouTuber. But what happens if that fails or you just no longer have the time or passion to do it anymore? You're not a YouTuber. You're just a person that started making YouTube videos because you enjoyed it and it was fun. And if one day you wake up and you decide that it's no longer fun, that's okay. The things that were the center of my existence in my 20s are pretty much non-existent in my 30s. And that's something that I've finally been able to come to terms with over these last few years. And I'm glad I've had this movie to continuously fall back on when I'm experiencing some resistance to change. And I had a chance to sit down and watch this movie with my son for the first time about a week ago. And that was really weird and surreal. One day when I'm no longer here and he's feeling resistant to change, maybe this movie and possibly this video can help him through that as well. Anyways, sorry to serious that out any more than it already was. Thanks for watching. It's your boy Eddie Knights. This is Nerdy Before It Was Cool.